Welcome. Marge, we'll get kicked off here. Do you have anything you want to tell us worthwhile? That you know.
Well, there's a smart mouth over there. We're glad that Joe's back because now Roy's gonna have it just real cool. But otherwise, well, I'll tell you what, Bob and Ruth have not been here in a long time. They went on a cruise and they recommend it to Alaska. And the word you used was gorgeous, right? Anyway, we're glad everyone's here. I'm glad to be here. My husband.
Well, I guess there's no one else we can embarrass, so we'll try to get going here. But anyway, thank you for coming. We'll get started in just a second. Today is a good day for me because Dave Smith and his lovely bride are here. It's always a treat for me. Dave has had a little operation. He was on a cane 3 weeks ago. Now he's off, so up and going. And with that said, Roy, will you have our prayer, baby?
Loving Father in heaven, thankful for a Sabbath day. Good. Put aside the things of this world. We ask, Lord, that you be with us, that we worship in spirit and truth, and that we can have the hearts of Lois and Eunice and all of the early Christians so that we can be ready when Christ returns this week.
Thank you. And welcome to our folks on Zoom. Appreciate it. Thank you. Dave?
If you haven't been on an Alaska cruise since that came up, the one word I would use is forever. You never run out of Alaska. It goes on and on. The ship may cruise all night long, and you look out the window, it's still Alaska. 2, 3, 4 days later, it's still Alaska. It's just immense. But a great place to go. Hopefully you'll go, and hopefully you'll go in July or August. These are the best months to do that. At least if you want to see anything. We have an interesting lesson study today. I want to start with prayer because this is a smart class. I always enjoy this class for what you say and how I learn, and it's great. But it's going to take more than human opinion to deal with some of the issues we're dealing with today. This lesson plunges right into the heart of parenting. And that can be a real mixed experience, a real challenge. It dives into the heart of legacy, what we pass on to those after us, and what that influence is, and what that has to do with parenting. If we get there, and if God is good, which he is, hopefully we won't, it dives into the heart of women in spiritual leadership and other issues that Paul raises in the text that we read for today. So we're going to need God's wisdom today, not our own. Our opinions aren't going to be good enough. And I'm going to pray for that, but invite you to pray at the same time. So let's pray. Father, what we read in your word, what we look at in the next few minutes, is right in the center of life as so many of us live it. It's a real challenge, and the devil has perverted things, turned things inside out, upside down. Your word tries to correct that and give us understanding. We can't have that understanding without your spirit. So I want to pray that your spirit would be here in extra measure today, work in and through our minds so that we might learn truth. For it is a truth, your truth, sets us free. Pray in Jesus' name. Okay. This is a lesson study about whom? No? Just a little bit. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand if you studied your lesson. And if you haven't been an Adventist long, or you're not an Adventist, or you haven't been whatever, I can remember the day when I was a child sitting in church and literally somebody would stand there and say, number of people who studied their lesson. Do you remember this?
Oh, yeah.
They would raise their hands, they try to get a count. Number of pieces of literature distributed this week. So people would hit the gas station, hand out a lot. It was kind of weird stuff. We don't do that anymore, and I'm not gonna ask you if you study, but does anybody know who the lesson is about? A young man? Timothy, yeah, okay. So it's a lesson study about Timothy, but as you get into Timothy's life and what you read in scripture about him, you run into some heavy things. And today we're going to try to navigate with the help of some of that. And interestingly enough, your lesson study as it was given to you does not start with Timothy. It starts with what would seem to be a completely unrelated story, but of course it's not really. It's found in an Old Testament book, 1 Samuel chapter 1. And it too is a story, and an unusual story, and certainly has to do with parenting. So 1 Samuel chapter 1, verses 8 to 28. And for time's sake, I'm not going to read this with you, but I'll let you know where it is. But I'm going to kind of put the story together so that we can talk about it, and encourage you, if you've not read it, to read it, because it's a very interesting and most unusual story. That's 1 Samuel chapter 1, verses 8 to 28. So this is a story about a man. His name is, anybody know? Elkanah, yeah. And this man has how many wives?
Two.
Shame on him. Right? It's interesting because there are stances against multiple spouses in scripture, but this is not one of them. Don't believe anywhere in this mention what happened. So here's a man, he has two wives, and he loves one of them more than he loves the other one. Does that remind you of anyone else you've read about in the Bible?
Yeah.
Who's that? Yeah, Jacob, and he loved who more? Rachel more than Leah. And we're going to find a connection between these two stories and try to bridge over to Timothy, see what we can learn. So in this experience, you have this man, he has two wives, and at the beginning of the story, I'll call him the second wife, I don't know the order that he had them. Second wife is having children. And it's not just that she's having children, she's gloating over the other wife, Hannah. She's rubbing it in Hannah's face. Now, I'm male, and we have our way of settling issues. Females have theirs. And this is a female thing somehow, because she is really getting after Hannah and saying, God doesn't bless you, God doesn't love you, you don't have any children. And apparently in that day, having children was a really big thing, especially having males. So if you had children, and especially if you had male children, then that was a big thing in that culture to celebrate, or to lord it over someone else, apparently. So what would happen is that Hannah would go during feast days with her husband to celebrate and to be where the people were to worship. And when she would go, the other wife would just persecute her, just say the most awful things to her, rubbing in, you don't have any children. I have the children. I have value. You have no value. Just a really tough situation. And Hannah allowed this to work on her. Some people might say, well, in time, or God's in control, or they might have an attitude like that, but she took it to heart. And it was hard on her. And she would go and she would pray in the temple to God to give her a child, to break the drought of having children. And she was so earnest that she went to the temple one day, and she was praying so hard that the priest, whose name was Eli, thank you, the priest looked at her and thought she was what? Drunk. She was just so into her prayer. It seemed like she was just incoherent and emotional because she was crying. And so he said something to her. Pastors will do this, right? Just kind of trying to, I don't even know if gently correct or guide, but saying, it's probably better not to drink so early in the morning. And she immediately protested, I'm not drunk. I don't drink alcohol. I am praying. And she was praying for God to give her a son. So this battle between the two wives goes on for a little while. And finally, Hannah prays what I think had to be a tough prayer. I don't know. Those of you who are mothers can tell us today, and I really want your opinion on this. But basically what she prayed was, God, if you give me a child, I will give that child back to you. So I'll have the child, but it won't be mine. It will be yours. And I don't think I know too many mothers who would necessarily do that. Give up your child just so you could have a child. It'd be like giving up for adoption and your child is gone. But she prays that prayer. She promises God, if you give me a child, I will give the child to work for you the rest of his life. Do that. And he talks to her husband, and Elkanah is kind of like, well, if God keeps his part, that can work. You do what you think is best. At one point, she is so desperate that she kind of says, I'm going to die if I don't have a child. And Elkanah is a male, and we don't always get it. So he says what he thinks would be comforting to her, which is, well, surely 10 of me would be worth one child. And that does not work. It crashes and burns in a major fire. But she prays that prayer. Apparently, God honors that prayer, gives her a son. He weans the son, and as soon as he's weaned, she takes him back to the temple, gives him to the priest Eli, says, here's the son I promised to work for the Lord. He's yours for the rest of his life. Did you do that? I mean, it's kind of tough, very unusual, but that's how it happened. Now, here's a question, and I'm going to ask some questions that might evoke unpleasant memories or emotions, and I just want to be upfront. I'm not meaning to make anyone uncomfortable, and I live my life in a no judgment zone, so I don't mean anything by anything except that I realize life is complex. And when we live it, we have to sort through scripture and how it applies to us and how we live that out. So here's my first question. What was God's role in blessing the first wife, Penuel, I think was her name? So in blessing the first wife with all these children, and what was his role in keeping Hannah from having any children? Or did God not have a role in it, and it just was what it was? What would you say to that? Yes.
I would kind of think that it is what it is. I mean, a lot of women can't have children. That saying God is, closing up their womb because he's closing up their womb, or they just can't have children. But she couldn't have children, but he opened her womb.
I like the way you put that. Couldn't have it, but he opened her womb. It's interesting he didn't do that till the other wife had a number of children, made her life miserable. I want to mention a couple of texts here. 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 6. It says in 1 Samuel 1, verse 6, that because the Lord had closed Hannah's womb. Now, I could skip by these texts and my life would be so much simpler. Just, you wouldn't even notice, but I think people have to wrestle with this a little bit. I also think that even though I agree with what was said, the people who go through that experience, even today, probably wrestle some with God's role in it and trying to understand why this either is working or why this isn't working. Yes.
I think, trials and tribulations are faith, you know, and so she sought the Lord even more, right? Because of her pain and her desire so much for a child. I know what that would feel like, because I mean, I've always wanted a kid since I was a little kid. So, and some people don't, you know, but I think it tests your faith, and I think God knew the perfect timing that child needed to be born in the role of his that he needed to play in history.
I think you're absolutely right, but I also think that if you're Hannah, it is so hard to wait for God's time.
Absolutely.
Because there's something in you that's a clock ticking with your own timing. And it almost like God is ignoring that or something, and it's probably something you have to really wrestle through, but I think it's a very good point. Thank you. Yes.
This is just conjecture, kind of building on what Dory said, but she waited a child. She was a very different mother than she would have been if she'd had children right on. And I think God had in mind the master plan for Samuel, because he was a very God-inspired prophet, probably a lot due to his godly mother.
You know, that's a really good point, because I think Samuel was, of all the prophets, the most important one in the history of Israel. And he really stood in God's stead before the people. And if you remember his story, very interesting, because it was when he was prophet that the people decided they didn't want a prophet, they wanted a what? A king. And the whole history of God's people, according to scripture, just pivoted on that and changed downhill. And Samuel took that very personally. He said to God, you know, they're vacating me. They don't want me. What good am I? And I gave a very interesting reply, which was, no, Samuel, it's not you they're deserting, it's me. Don't take it personally. But Samuel was a huge figure in the history of God's people back at that time, and she was the mother. So I think it's a good point, yes, Ken.
This might have been covered, I couldn't really hear, but Israel was in a state of, go through Judges and you read it. It's falling, what's going on, and it's just like there hadn't been a prophet for 400 and something years when Jesus came. Change had to be made, and now Israel has to have a change and a strong leader. This was the guy that came along, and I think it was planned. Timing was perfect.
From God's point of view, absolutely perfect, as it always is, right? We have to have enough faith to go along with that. That's a big thing. Hello? Somebody online wants to speak, just let me know. Yes.
I was going to mention, looking at God's protection. We can see Hannah and the difficulties and yet who Samuel was and so forth. And in Paul's time, we can compare Mark with well. Mark caused Paul and Silas to separate because of the conflicts that what he was and what he was doing, who he became. We can still see it. God protects Mark because he wrote the first gospel in that sense and had the heart. And so what it tells me is protection of God, though it may cause conflict in our lives in terms of pain, I'll say it that way. We need to trust that God's way is the right way because it fulfills his purpose, prepares us, in this case, Christ's return.
Thank you for sharing that, and I want to follow that up and then I'll take a comment. You say we need to trust that God's way is the right way. It was a few years ago that it hit me, this is why I'm sharing it, what it is you really need to trust about God. In one sense, that's exactly right, but in another sense, it's deeper. What is it you really need to trust when you wrestle with God with an issue in your life like this or like something else? What is it about God you really need to trust? Yeah,
Love.
that he loves you. That's the bottom line. But when you think about having faith in God, when you think about trusting God, I think if you're honest with yourself, you're going to get to a point where you recognize either you believe, given however this thing is playing out in your life, that he loves you, or you're questioning it. Because how could someone who loves you allow whatever it is you're dealing with? So thank you for bringing up that point, and I want to challenge you to think about that, because pray for faith. If you want to trust God fully and completely, it's going to have to be that he loves you. That whatever happens, that's how that is. So I'm just going to skip by this part except to mention it because it's so interesting, because this is one that we just read of several instances of what I like to call baby wars in the Bible. And baby wars are interesting. I don't know if we still have them. I'm not aware of that. But apparently in that culture, with it being so important to have children, to seem that having children was some sign of God's blessing in your life, that mothers, women would really go at it, and they would go to extremes. Can you think of another example of baby wars in Scripture?
Solomon.
King Solomon, yes, very good example. Anyone else?
Sarah and Hagar.
Yes, Sarah and Hagar. Now you have handmaids involved, you get into kind of a messy thing, and yet if you're tracking history, Bible times to today, who ended up being her generation, not her generation, her heirs? Who? Muslims, Arabs. And then on Rebecca's side, the Jews. So you have Israel, you have the Arabs, straight from those two women. And it's very interesting because both groups claim Abraham as their father. You have this mixed thing. And if you go to Jerusalem today, you run into that very readily if you get on the Temple Mount. You kind of see how that's still playing out. But of course, right now you see it in how it's playing out in a more military way. But those groups have been at odds ever since, yet God took pity on Hagar and allowed her to save her son and to have a generation that came from that. And then, of course, blessed Sarah too. So that's a really good one. And you've already mentioned, I think, Jacob and Leah and Rachel, and they really went at it. I mean, this was serious business. When it wasn't working for them, they just said, take my handmaid. And I don't want to get into the politics of this. But somehow that was acceptable, or it's what they did. And so babies were popping up all over the place, either through the wives or the servants themselves. They were claiming victory and then defeat and victory and defeat. Baby wars. Well, I want to go from that to Timothy and make a connection about parenting, having children, some of the issues that come from that. And I think we can also include grandchildren as well. I'm a grandparent now, I have 6 grandkids, and my life is full and running over. And I feel like I am somehow still involved in helping raise my grandchildren like I did my children. Well, nobody told me when I started as a parent that it doesn't stop somewhere. And you just have this respite the rest of your life. It doesn't, you never stop. Even with your own children, you never stop. My wife spends at least 1 to 2 hours every single day talking to my girls. They're going through all kinds of things and processing whatever. And of course, I put in some time in that too. But it doesn't stop. It just keeps going. So when you look at Timothy's life, you begin to sense some of the issues that come, it can touch close to home. And I'm just going to bring up a few issues related to that. So Paul meets Timothy in Lystra, name of the place. And he learns that Timothy has a living mother and grandmother, Lois, Eunice, I think are the names, that they are Jews and they are faithful, they are believers, the converted Jews, Christianity. Timothy is a child living in that home, but the husband is what? Greek. Not a Jew, not a Christian. So you have a child growing up in a home where you have a husband with one set of beliefs and whatever, and a wife and a grandmother with a different set, and you have this young man, Timothy. Now, Paul is told by the people in Lystra, you got to take this guy with you. You got to use this guy. He's amazing. He's wonderful, right? And Paul's like, okay, so he takes him on his journey, on his trip, going from city to city, talking about the rulings from the Council of Jerusalem and other things that he wants to share. Why do you think he picked Timothy to do that? And this can be conjecture. Yes.
He recently had the experience with Barnabas about John Mark. And so the spirit of fear in Mark. Probably what he observed. First of all, he didn't have. And second,
And he mentions that.
Yeah.
That's quoted in scripture. That was, I see the same godliness in you that I see in them. Paul, this was not necessarily the focus of this week's lesson, but I think it's worth noting. Paul is on these trips. These are the last trips of his life. He knows he's going to die. He's a prisoner during part of this time. His life is hard. People try to kill him. They think they have killed him, and then he comes back to, like John, when you fell the other night, he somehow makes it again, and this is how it is. So Paul is living this hard life, and he's going from city to city. Why is he doing that? It's not a vacation. These are hard trips. You don't just get on Delta Airlines and go. You get on a ship, which may be shipwrecked, as happened to him, probably more than once. These are hard journeys. Why is he doing this?
Called by God to share the gospel.
He's called by God to share the gospel. You have to remember that Paul was an apostle by personal revelation, right? Apostles were those who had personally known and seen Jesus. So he kind of tried to include himself in that group, and I think rightfully so. But Paul is in the last part of his life, and he is giving everything he has to give. Why? Because Christianity depends on it. This is still new and early, and there's not internet. There aren't cell phones. There's not the evening news. They have to personally go wherever they can and take Christianity, the gospel, with them. Paul's trying to get to as many places as he can, and he's trying to do what he can before he dies, so that after his death, it will all still, God will use it. It will keep going. And somehow he sees Timothy in this. Now, I'm going to make a comment about Timothy, and then I'll field your question. Timothy grew up in a home where not only Christian thought was present and very influential in his life, he also grew up in a home where there was pagan belief. And Paul needed someone who could talk to those people who thought that way, say, hey, I understand. I understand what you're thinking, and I love you, and to be a connection, which is really, really important. one time when I was president of an institution, but not the closest one here, I had an opening for a board member. I thought about it and I prayed about it, and they did something a little unusual. I'd never done it before. But I went to talk to here in the city where I was not went to the Adventist church every Sabbath. Was always there, took his kids to Sabbath school, so he understood Adventist, but he was a leader in the community. And I asked him if he would join our board, and he looked at me, he was a very busy man. He said, "Why would I do that?" And I said, "Because we need someone who understands the community, and somebody who understands Adventist and can be a bridge to represent us." And he said, "Oh, okay, I'll do it." I think Timothy was a bridge for Paul, among other things. And that Paul saw that, and he had such a burden. Christianity, the gospel has to keep going. He gave everything he had to give. So did Timothy. He was martyred when he was about 90 years of age. And of course, all of the apostles were martyred, except for tried to kill him out of boiling oil, but for some reason that didn't work. Okay, back here and then Ken. Okay, yeah.
That's what I was gonna say about
Oh,
him.
sorry.
Having a father that was Greek, and so he would understand. Plus, he wanted to pass the mantle on to him. He didn't want it to die when he died.
Exactly. And that passing of the mantle, when you believe in a cause, is it's a sacred thing. You have Elijah and Elisha. That's just a huge thing where you pray for God's help, because even though your life may be slipping away, and you know your own mortality, you see the end of the road like you've never seen it before. What you most believe in has to keep going. That's how you feel about it. And Paul was very much that way, very strong feelings. Yeah.
You're on a roll. Keep going.
Roll. Well, she's helping us be on a roll, I say, but thank you. So I want to ask a question here, and this is maybe the hardest question that I would ask. I don't know if it's the most important one. I think it's important enough to ask. There's a word used in this week's lesson, which is a word that I have thought about. You've probably thought about it. For a lot of people, the older you get, the more you think about it. It's just human nature, and it's the word legacy. And in the lesson this week about Timothy, we read that Timothy was considered to be the legacy of his mother and his grandmother. So they passed that on. He was it. My question is, can your children be your legacy? And what does that mean? I'll give you a little context. How many of you watched the Olympics? I know some of you stopped after the opening ceremony, and I understand that, but the athletes didn't do that. So if you did watch it, how many of you watched the Olympics? I'm part of the Olympics. Okay. Very clearly, the producers of NBC and the affiliates had a plan going into the Olympics more than I think ever before, which was to feature families. So they would have Snoop Dogg sit next to parents who were cheering for their child. And in some cases, they actually interviewed the families and how did this happen? They showed human interest things like there was a Scandinavian high jumper. I think he was Scandinavian.
Swedish.
Swedish. Is that Scandinavian?
Yeah.
No. All right. I'm just trying to be broad based. Swedish. And he was, when he was a little child, his parents taught him in the house how to jump. Little sticks. And they had video of this. So you see this little boy jumping over this stick, and I mean, he's good. And then after a while, the house couldn't hold him. So they set up bars outside, and they created a runway so he could run and use a pole and try to get over the bar. But their yard wasn't big enough, so they extended the yard and the runway into it's probably somebody else's property. And he would run and he would do that. And he won. Is that right? I think he won the high jump. It was amazing. So the parents in the Olympic presentation were just featured in this. He was clearly their legacy, and the other parents are just beaming. But I didn't see too many parents interviewed or featured when their child didn't win. And I'm mentioning that because when you raise the question of your children being your legacy, what if they aren't what you hoped for or you prayed for? Then are they your legacy? Will other people judge you by them? And is that fair? Is that right? Can children be your legacy? It's not a trick question, by the way. It's just a tough one. I heard an answer.
They can,
Yes,
not always, but they can.
they can be.
That's what you hope for and pray for.
Yes. Yes, it is. But if not,
You keep praying.
not only keep praying, I want to add a thought to that. The book of Revelation, it talks about the golden bowls in heaven. Familiar with this text? It says the golden bowls in heaven are the what? Prayers of the saints. So prayers, if you keep praying, are stored in heaven and remain active past your life. My mother, for example, my grandfather, her father, passed away when he was just short of 93 years of age. And at that point, he had no reason to believe my mother would ever be in heaven, given the circumstances. But when she turned 80, he went back to church, got rebaptized, gave her heart to God before she died. He wouldn't know that, but his prayers for his daughter stayed active. There's no statute of limitations on prayers. Once you pray a prayer, it's alive forever in heaven, in a golden bowl. I don't know how it works, but it's active. It keeps going. So when you say praying now, keep praying, how important that is, because that's just building the energy for storage for the future. And it's a beautiful thing. And many of us can give testimony about that and how that's played out in our lives. Here's a thought for you. What time did we stop?
11:15.
11:15. Oh, good. That was 11 o'clock, setting my old part of that. I would like to suggest that while children may be your legacy or something else may be your legacy, in fact, in many ways, Timothy probably became Paul's legacy. And Samuel probably became Eli's legacy. His own children did not. That story. But there is a song, and I'm not going to sing it, that's the good news, but there's a contemporary Christian song. The first time I heard it, I thought, wow, and I've listened to it over and over, thought about it. I think it's worth thinking about. It's done by a group called Casting Crowns. I don't know if you've heard of them or not, but the title of the song is Only Jesus. And I have the lyrics here. I would like to read just a few of them and listen to this if you're not familiar with the song. Make it count, leave a mark, build a name for yourself, dream your dreams, face your heart, but above all else, make a name the world remembers. But all an empty world can sell is empty dreams. I got lost in the light when it was up to me to make a name the world remembers, but Jesus is the only name to remember. It goes into a kind of a chorus. And I don't want to leave a legacy. I don't care if they remember me, only Jesus. I've only got one life to live. I'll let every second point to him, only Jesus. All the kingdoms built, all the trophies won, will crumble into dust when it's said and done, because all that really mattered, that I live the truth to the ones I love. Was my life the proof that there is only one whose name will last forever? And then it goes on from there. I've thought a great deal about this. I've thought about what legacy means. I have to admire somebody who says, no matter what my children are like, no matter what my life was like, I want people to remember Jesus more than they remember anything else about me. That's one way of looking at legacy. Now,
I'll join the line. Well, I'm struggling with the word legacy a little bit, but I think that what is so crushing to a parent is that's the only thing that you want to give your children is you want them to be connected to him, you want them to worship him, you want them to know that he is their friend, that he intercedes for them, all the things that you have spent your life learning about God, which is a growing process that we keep doing. You want to give it to them, and you have to get it from him. You can be part of it. But I think the crushing thing as a Christian parent, that's the only thing you want. And your love is not enough to accomplish that. God's love. And I think we all struggle with to the next generation. And I think it's so true. You don't give up. Never give up, because God doesn't. And you just say, I'll put my prayers in that golden bowl. I will be faithful. I will love them with all I can love. But I had to learn that I wasn't the Holy Spirit. I don't know. That was a revelation. Somehow with my children, I thought I was responsible to teach them and get them and end up on the finish line. And I've told them both separately, both our daughters, I expected to march into heaven with each of them and say, look at it, I'm returning to you what you gave to me. And now I know they're gonna say to God, she was the hardest task you gave us. Because I have learned so much more about God from them and by being their parent than I could ever give to them. Maybe I am their legacy.
wow. Well said. It makes me remember a time when I was asked to teach a general Sabbath school lesson in the Cottonwood Church back in the days when they did that. And the lesson was on God as a hurting parent. Very interesting lesson. You think about it. God is a perfect parent. No fault, no flaw. How many of his children does he lose? The majority. I don't know the number, but God as a perfect parent loses more children to heaven than he wins. And if that happens to God, why would we be so bold as to think that it's our task to get them to heaven rather than the Holy Spirit's task? That this is more a God thing than it is anything else. Now, I taught that lesson that day, and afterwards several parents came up and we started a hurting parents group. We ran that for 2 years, and we learned a lot through that as well. But understanding the role of God, the Holy Spirit, and ourselves, even in our closest relationships, our most intimate ones with each other and with children, is really crucial, and it is touched on here. Timothy was, in one sense, a legacy of his mom and his grandma. But Timothy probably had friends and other relatives who were not a legacy. And that's kind of how life plays out, even for God, because he honors freedom of choice, the heart of everything for God. When you're dealing with somebody who has freedom of choice, you cannot control that choice, because that's not love. Love is not manipulative, not controlling. God's love isn't that way, and hopefully ours is not either, but We can't control the outcome. Okay, yes.
Don't you think sometimes we judge what our children are doing by our standards? And God sees them completely different and we need to trust him.
Could you repeat that and say it as loudly as you can? I think all of us need to hear that.
I think sometimes we use our standards and God uses a completely different standard. We judge our children sometimes because of what we think they ought to do instead of trusting God to take care of them.
Amen. Mean that. I picture, it's taken me years to come up with that picture, but every young person that I see, no matter what they look like, how they're acting at the time, I picture every child, every young person wearing the same t-shirt. I'm not real creative. The t-shirt says, God is not finished with me yet. Because we sometimes think at certain points in our life that we know an outcome and we don't. God does see them differently. I say praise God for that. Because we cannot read the human heart, even of each other, even of ourselves. Our human heart, Jeremiah says, is the most deceitful thing in the universe. So to try to trust our judgment, make those kinds of judgments is such a mistake, but so natural to do. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Well, we're going to move on here. We talked about this, and I'm going to kind of pause in the narrative and ask a question. Because this is a question, this is a lesson about two women who have this influence on a young man and the repercussions of that on through Christian history. So it's very much a study, as your studies are right now, on the role of women in living the spiritual life and the influence and opportunity they have to do that. So here's my question, very open-ended. Have you ever personally been influenced in a positive way by a woman? How was that? What difference did that make in your life? I think it's good to have some positive examples, especially before we go to things maybe more difficult. A woman in your life that made a difference. Yes. Beautiful, beautiful.
She knows. I paid her to say that.
Well, that's a beautiful thing. Thank you for sharing that. Someone else? Yes.
I remember when I was in third grade, I went to Battle Creek Academy and we had a really long driveway. And I came from a big family of 8 kids. You just were one of 8 kids. You feel like you were hurt instead of family. And my third grade teacher reached out to me, I guess made me feel special. But then she let me start driving her car in the driveway. I mean, I just steered. She used the
Okay,
wheel.
thank you.
But she let me sit in the driver's seat. I got to steer her to the end of the driveway every day that she let me do that. I was in third grade. And I would get out and run back around. Well, but it just made me feel special. He would take notice of me. When I didn't feel special at home, I just felt like I existed at home, I guess. Made me feel special.
And you needed that. You probably weren't going to have that experience at home, but somebody believed in you, invested in you. What a difference that can make. Thank you for that. What else? Yes.
Think about my mother. Mother died when I was 9, and brother and a sister. I teach my brother for the last 7 years, teach in this class every Sabbath. And part of that is because of who she is or was, and what she did for her family, because she raised us from that age all the way through adulthood.
Beautiful. Nothing easy about that. What a beautiful thing. How many of us are legacies in a sense of a mother carried the total burden of everything, gave everything she had for us? not be who or what we are without that. Thank you for sharing that. Yes.
My fifth grade teacher, I'll leave it at that, and then the person that God led me to marry. Not to M-A-R-Y, but to M-I-R-R-I-E-D, married. She's been a powerful influence in my life. As I've had some, well, let's just say I got too much of a dose of worldliness when I was.
You're not alone.
Yeah, even though I've had some real strong spiritual tendencies, I could have seen myself disappear in the light, like a lot of hippie types disappeared late 60s.
That could be a story for many people. I would give a similar testimony. This probably would about our spouses. Them. Women are huge instruments of salvation. The Holy Spirit, God's working in the hearts of men. Many of us could tell stories. God bless me. Yes, Wendy.
I'm sitting here thinking, I see that my friend is on the screen,
Oh,
Fran. Francis.
yes.
Anyway, she was my bus driver in public school sophomore year. My freshman year, my mother died and my dad got divorced from his, it was just a ruckus of a year. And then
Freshman year of high school.
freshman year of high school, it was just an awful year. And then I started school my sophomore year dreading it. God put this beautiful Christian lady as my school bus driver. For an hour and 45 minutes every day, I would sit in front and she would talk about God with me. Such a way that here I am. And she joins us from Indiana, so I think she's up there now. Looks like.
Well, welcome.
Yeah, it's just nice to have her. She'll call me and we'll talk about the lesson stuff. Made a massive impact on me, enough to where I looked for her later in life.
That's remarkable.
Yeah,
Absolutely remarkable.
beautiful lady.
Yes.
Still is.
Thank you for sharing that.
Can you hear me? Can I say something?
Please,
Friend, that's her.
please go ahead.
You don't have any idea what impact you're going to have on a person if you just love them like Jesus loves you. And there were a lot of years that we were not connected, and then her son found me on Facebook and she reached out to me. I have been to your church a number of times with her, and I join this class when I can because of Wendy. So God is still working in our lives and blessing us with each other.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a beautiful relationship you both have and a remarkable history. God writes the script. We live it out. Some of us try to write it, but we don't do well. God writes it. It's amazing what happens. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to be careful with the rest of the lesson. Because I want to end on a positive high note. But if you have a pen, paper, or something, I'm going to mention some of the scriptures that were part of this week's study. And you can at least look them up, see what you think. You might readily dismiss them, and that's perfectly fine. Or you might wrestle with them a little bit, or maybe you'll teach a lesson and you'll bring it back. So one of the questions in this week's lesson for you was what Paul asked Timothy to do. And basically, in essence, what Paul asked Timothy to do was, you keep the torch burning. You keep the church going. You do whatever it takes to make sure that this gospel goes to the whole world and that it's not corrupted. And at this point, if you study Paul's life, there are tons of people deserting him, but he's on his own. His good friends have left him, many of them, not all of them. And he's feeling the pain of people who have left him, that he counted on, that he believed were there for him. And he's turning to Timothy saying, I need you to do this because I've learned you can't count on everybody. People aren't going to stick with you. And some really turn on him hard in harsh ways. So he turns to Timothy, and you have two books of the Bible, 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy, where Paul is writing to Timothy specifically outlining what he wants him to do to keep the church going. Here are some things, if you didn't take time to study that, that might be worth thinking about. In 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 1 to 3, something that's very relevant today in the political scene. Paul writes Timothy, and he says, I want you to pray, I want you to intercede, and I want you to give thanks for all who are in authority. I wonder how many of us have done that on a regular basis. If you study who the leaders were when Paul said that to Timothy, these were evil killers, mean people, nothing to do with God, totally godless, wreaking havoc in their world, all about power, corruption. And Paul is telling Timothy, I want you to pray for them, intercede for them. I want you to give thanks for them. And he's doing it for a main reason, which is because I want the church to have peace. Have you noticed, I have to believe you have, what has happened to the generic Christian church in the United States during the current election? The church has become so politicized, so divided, including the Seventh-day Adventist church. No one's immune, that there is anything but peace. And Paul knew if you dive into politics and bring that in your heart as strong or stronger than the things that form the foundation of your Christian life, you will not have peace. You're going to be after each other. It's not going to work. But if you pray for them, you intercede for them, you thank God for them, somehow God will help you move on. At least that's what Paul seemed to hope. That's kind of a tough one. In 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 11 to 15, in essence, Paul says, in your churches, do not let women, what? Not let them be spiritual leaders. And he cites biblical example. He says, Adam was first, and Eve was first to be deceived. Adam was not deceived, but he chose the wrong thing, right? So he lays it out. He says this, and that's something that in most churches still seems to be a flaring issue. Now, my wife is retired, but she was a pastor for 25 years. And I believed in her calling, believed in her ministry. But I also knew what Paul wrote Timothy and have wrestled a little bit with how to understand it, except that I recognize in Paul's day, things were very different for the role of women. What was expected of them, how they functioned, how culture dictated all of that. But I recognize you have to be careful. Because if you take this holy book and you read something and you think you don't like it or you don't believe it or whatever, so you start thinking to yourself, well, that's how it was then, but it's not that way now, so it doesn't apply to me. You better be careful because that can be a real slippery slope, right? To start sliding. And where are you going to stop with what you believe and what you don't believe? I don't have an answer for that. And that's why we're moving on.
That's good.
You know, I was
I got a
at,
view there. Keep
I
going.
was at the general conference in Atlanta when the vote was taken not to ordain women as a Seventh-day Adventist church. was a very interesting situation because as far as I'm concerned, there were evil spirits there. And not because of the outcome, but the balcony was loaded with people who were not delegates, families, friends, whoever. I mean, just absolutely loaded. And they were yelling out, "You're going down, going down." And when those of us in the North American division left our seats, it was time to go and make our votes. They yelled out specifically to the female pastors who were going up that you're wrong and this isn't going to work for you. And they were yelling out. And Elder Paulson, who was the previous General Conference president, and I don't know if any of you knew him, but I did, very gentle, kind Christian man who spent a lot of his time overseas, including in Africa, made an appeal to the people saying, you know me, you know my heart, I've given my life to you. And I want to appeal to you. And he made his appeal and they booed him, yelled at him, and made him cry, broke his heart. I talked to him very briefly, much later than that, and just said, you've done the right thing, but what a price you've had to pay. So sorry. So these issues are alive and difficult, but I think the most important thing is try to be biblical and try to be Christian. And you address them, deal with them in the best way that you can. Chapter 3 of 1 Timothy chapter 2 talks about the high standards for male leaders. And I don't know if you've ever been ordained as an elder or a deacon, and if somebody has read these texts to you, but they make you think and make you self-examine, like, is that really me? And the part of it that I have questions about is the part that has to do with this, and I'm quoting from verse 3 of chapter 3. He must manage his own family well, see that his children obey him with proper respect. If anyone does not know how to manage his own family, how can he take care of God's church? There was a point in our parenting experience when we talked to each other, Sherry and I did, about should I drop my leadership roles? Because I don't think I could just stand in front of everybody and say, I've been a perfect parent and I've got perfect children, and so I can help manage you. But I came up with a thought that is not addressed here, so I don't know what to do with it. And the thought was this. Many teenagers get to a point where parents are extra baggage. Just part of declaring your independence and whatever. It's not even necessarily personal, it's just how it plays out. You know, let me out here, Mom. I'm going to walk to school, you know, take me all the way, whatever it is. And parents at that point begin to realize, you know, I think at where I am right now, I'm not going to be the Holy Spirit. I don't think I have the influence. So I need someone else to come into my child's life and represent God and make a connection, which in many cases happens with Wendy and others. And so I decided as a leader in a Christian church that even if I didn't fully manage my own children's lives because they were free agents of choice, I could help somebody else's children. If I took myself away, I was robbing myself of an opportunity to help answer the prayer for somebody else in the way I was praying that somebody would come into my children's life. But it is in Scripture, it is in Timothy, and that's Paul's counsel. Not even a couple other things. Ken wants to end this thing. Let me end by saying this. The young people of this church are possibly the most important part of it. They may, in some ways, be the least appealing. But unless you as a church, not just individuals, invest yourselves fully in them, no matter how they're acting, no matter how they seem, unless you as a church fully support parents in their journey, no matter how their children are acting, This church is not fulfilling its mission the way God needs it to. I challenge you, as I do myself, to consider that very, very prayerfully. My twin brother one time was going to a church and he noticed a family where the son was very wayward, putting it mildly. And the family would slink into church, then they would slink out of church before anybody could talk to them, like they were ashamed. And he stopped the dad one day and intercepted him. It was a kind of a football move at the end of the service. He said, I just want you to know that I think you are great. I know you love your boy. I want you to know we are praying for you. We support you and we love you. And the man just broke down and wept and wept because he kept this inside so long. There are a lot of people like that in this church, in the other church, who support each other, support the children, see what God will do, and it will be up to him to determine the outcome.
Dave, another home run. Thank you. I will tell you in all fairness, and I don't want to worry you out with it. Had it not been for Dave Smith 30 years ago, teaching Sabbath school, I don't know where I'd be. I was not interested in Sabbath school or you or him or anybody that darkened that door over there. Those Sabbath school lessons kind of raised me up. Somebody came along that could teach me. Well, I was 43 or so. But I want to tell you, the first great influence on my life were my grandmother and my aunt. Without one woman, I didn't get influenced spiritually at Southern Missionary College. Just didn't click. I didn't know any more about Jesus than I did John Glenn. But you know what it was? It was her kindness, Laura Wells. Someday I think there should be a statue for the people she helped. Well, thank you, Doug. Women, you know, women didn't even have the right to vote in this country till 1920. You can twist the scriptures into anything you want. It was okay to own a slave. You could prove it in the Bible. It was proven for thousands of years. Okay to own one. But anyway, things change. I appreciate Dave Smith. Next week, John Cosper will be teaching Lydia. What a girl. Leader, business person, spiritual leader, good person to enter scriptures. I've been accused of making this a class of women's liberation. I'd like to remind everybody that this class was started. They won 15 or 20 years ago, and the name of it was Women in the Bible. Anything about them? We don't. Not much. But we've been on a learning process. So anyway, John will be here next week. Jerry, would you have our prayer?
Loving and eternal Father, we are so grateful for your love, your grace, your mercy. Pray that each of us will experience that in our lives and embrace it so totally. We learn how to extend it to others. No matter what others are going through, Father, out to them your love, your grace, your kindness. Pray for each family. Want to be unbroken family circles. Send him soon and cast our crowns, those we love at his feet.
Thank you. Heard a man say what? Western. Someone will give me a hard time. He said, God help us if they ever get the right to vote.
Wow, whoa.
It's been cut off there 16 years. I went to her. They just asked how and how. She got $3. She said the youngest one is getting